Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episode. Real wartime stories, declassified reports, and forgotten footage brought back to life. In May 1945, when the fighting in Europe stopped, the supply lines that had carried the United States Army from Normandy to the Elbe suddenly found themselves pointed toward a new kind of mission. The war was over, but logistics had not ended. The U.S. Army Transportation Corps faced a ruined continent. Every bridge between Magdeburg and Berlin was damaged or destroyed. Every fuel depot had been bombed. Every railway line east of the Elbe was twisted iron. Yet Berlin, now divided between the Allies, had to be fed, supplied, and administered. The first American convoys into the city in June 1945 moved along what had once been the Reichsautobahn, a narrow ribbon of cracked concrete bordered by shell holes and burned-out vehicles. Fuel stocks were limited, spare parts non-existent, and U.S. vehicles already worn from 11 months of operations. To keep the logistical flow moving, the Americans did something practical and unpublicized. They used German trucks. The captured motor pool in the U.S. occupation zone contained thousands of vehicles, seized from Wehrmacht depots and civilian transport offices. According to the June 1945 report of the 2nd Military District, Bavaria, approximately 12,400 serviceable German trucks were taken over by the U.S. Army, ranging from light Opel Blitz 3-tonners to heavy Henschel 33D16 by 6 cargo trucks and Fawn and Bussing and AG tractors. Many were in poor condition, worn tires, cracked engines, missing carburetors, but still operable. The Transportation Corps ordered that every usable truck be tagged "Captured Vehicle, Property of U.S. Army," and pressed into service. Colonel Robert M. Little, commander of the 6,950th Transportation Truck Battalion, recalled in his daily log that on June 12, 1945, the first convoy of 47 captured German trucks left Kassel carrying 75 tons of rations and medical supplies bound for Berlin. The convoy included Opel Blitz 3-ton trucks, several Mercedes L4500 cargo vehicles, and 3 Krupp Protze light tractors. Painted over Wehrmacht markings, the trucks bore hastily stenciled white stars and black U.S. registration numbers. Their drivers were a mixture of American soldiers, German civilian volunteers, and former Wehrmacht mechanics hired by the Army under occupation regulations. Fuel was the first problem. The U.S. supply depots in Western Germany distributed only high-grade 80-octane gasoline for American vehicles, while most German trucks had low-compression engines designed for 74-octane or even wood gas systems. Many captured vehicles were converted to run on liquid fuel by dismantling gas generators. At the Hanau Ordnance Workshop, Army engineers established a German vehicle conversion section, staffed by 45 former Daimler-Benz technicians. Between June and September 1945, they reconditioned over 900 trucks, replacing cracked cylinder heads, adapting carburetors to American fuel, and installing standardized fittings. The same workshops repainted each vehicle olive drab and applied U.S. Army serials beginning with prefix GVT, German Vehicle Transport. The first months after the surrender were marked by chaos on the roads. The Reichsautobahn from Frankfurt through Eisenach to Leipzig was choked with refugees, destroyed vehicles, and minefields. Convoy speed rarely exceeded 15 miles per hour. American truck drivers referred to the journey east as the Berlin Run, a slow, dangerous, monotonous drive through bombed towns and bridge bypasses. The 6,950th Battalion records for July 1945 show that an average convoy took 42 hours to cover the 540 kilometers from Kassel to Berlin. Every fifth truck broke down before reaching its destination. Despite that, by August the Americans were moving more than 1,000 tons of cargo per day into the city, roughly half of it using captured German trucks. Supplies included food for the U.S. occupation forces, building materials for the bombed headquarters at Tempelhof, and fuel for the few functioning power stations. The Germans called them Ammerfahrzeuge mit deutschen Herzen, American trucks with German hearts. The vehicles themselves were a mixed assortment. The most common was the Opel Blitz 3.6-36S, the standard Wehrmacht 3-ton truck. Powered by a 3.6-liter straight-six engine developing 75 horsepower, it had a maximum road speed of 70 km per hour, though most barely reached 50 after years of hard use. The U.S. mechanics appreciated its simplicity and ruggedness. Spare parts could be scavenged from civilian garages, and the split rear axle design was familiar from pre-war American models. Fuel consumption was high, about 28 liters per 100 kilometers, but acceptable compared to the larger Henschel or Bussing NAG types. For heavier loads, the Americans used captured Mercedes-Benz L4500A 4.5-ton all-wheel drive trucks. These were rare, fewer than 4,000 produced during the war, but their six-cylinder OM67-4 diesel engines offered better torque and lower fuel consumption. In the autumn of 1945, the 7005th Truck Company operated a small fleet of 12 such vehicles on the Frankfurt-Berlin route, hauling engineering equipment and generators. The drivers noted that the German diesels could run on low-grade fuel oil, making them valuable when gasoline was scarce. Each convoy was accompanied by an ordnance maintenance detachment and a field kitchen. Breakdowns were constant. Clutch cables snapped, tires delaminate, and many German trucks used metric threads incompatible with American tools. The ordnance shops improvised adapters from scrap steel, often machining new bolts on portable lathes. Field photographs taken in September 1945 show lines of dusty German trucks parked along the Autobahn shoulder near Dessau, hoods open, soldiers bent over engines black with oil and dust. The caption reads simply, "Captured transport on route Berlin, 1945." Berlin itself presented another challenge. The city's roads were cratered and congested with Soviet and British convoys. At the American supply base in Zehlendorf, hundreds of captured trucks formed a temporary motor pool known as Depot E. Daily vehicle availability reports show between 380 and 420 operational trucks in August 1945, half of them German. Average daily mileage per vehicle, 110 kilometers. Average fuel issue, 46 gallons. The trucks distributed supplies to the western sectors, rations, coal, medical goods, and office equipment for the military government, Angus. In September 1945, the Army created the European Civil Affairs Division Motor Pool, ECADMP, to manage all captured German motor vehicles used by Allied forces. The directive, signed September 14 by Brigadier General Francis Ross, ordered all captured enemy motor transport within the U.S. zone suitable for continued operation will be inventoried, marked, and utilized for civil and military supply purposes until such time as local production can resume. By autumn 1945, more than 6,700 German trucks were officially operating under U.S. control in Germany and Austria. Of these, about 2,100 were assigned to Berlin supply operations, according to Transportation Corps Monthly Bulletin No. 9, November 1945. Fuel continued to be scarce. The Americans built a provisional fuel dump at Helmstedt, 20 miles west of the Soviet border, where convoys refueled before entering the Berlin corridor. The average round trip consumed 200 gallons of gasoline per truck. To extend range, engineers installed improvised auxiliary fuel tanks, 55-gallon drums mounted on truck beds, gravity-fed into the main tank by flexible hose. Drivers called them belly drums. Fire risk was high. A single spark could destroy a convoy. Regulations required each truck to carry sand buckets and fire extinguishers, but enforcement was uneven. Weather added another layer of difficulty. The winter of 1945-46 was one of the harshest in decades. Temperatures in central Germany dropped below -20 degrees Celsius in January. German-made cooling systems, designed for milder climates, froze solid. The Transportation Corps ordered the use of alcohol antifreeze mixtures, but supplies ran out quickly. Drivers kept engines running overnight to prevent freezing. Records from the 7005th Company list 12 engines seized due to frost, January 6, 1946. Yet operations never stopped. By February 1946, Berlin was receiving an average of 1,200 tons of supplies daily from the American zone. Convoys sometimes ran day and night. Each vehicle carried a painted convoy number on the windshield, and headlights were covered by blackout slits. At night the road eastward from Helmstedt glowed with small blue convoy lamps, a moving chain of light through the ruins of central Germany. Inside Berlin, captured German trucks became a common sight. Some still bore traces of Wehrmacht gray under olive paint. Others carried mismatched body panels scavenged from scrapyards. Civilians quickly learned to identify them. Children waved at the convoys. Men offered cigarettes for rides. The trucks delivered everything from flour to furniture for the reconstruction offices. A U.S. Army photographic unit documented these operations in early 1946, capturing images of German-built vehicles unloading sacks of flour near the Reichstag ruins. The caption read, "Ex-Wehrmacht trucks now serve Berlin civilians, U.S. Army supply." Maintenance was organized on a semi-permanent basis at Motor Repair Park No. 3, Tempelhof. Former Daimler-Benz workers employed by the U.S. Army repaired engines and rebuilt gearboxes. Monthly reports from April 1946 show 230 major overhauls completed and 400 minor repairs. German workers received payment in food rations and cigarettes. A note in the ordnance file TS 71-46 records, labor morale good, productivity improved with issue of warm clothing. The trucks operated under strict convoy discipline. Each column left Helmstedt at dawn, 20 vehicles per serial, with an interval of 200 yards. The speed limit was 25 miles per hour. Military police jeeps rode ahead and behind. Drivers were instructed to maintain spacing regardless of local civilians or debris. Breakdown crews followed with tow cables and spare tires. Reports indicate that for every 100 vehicles dispatched, 10 to 12 required tow assistance before reaching Berlin. By early September 1945, the U.S. Army Transportation Corps had fully established its temporary motor transport network across the American occupation zone in southern Germany. Yet the logistical problem of supplying Berlin through the agreed corridors remained severe. The railway system east of Kassel was heavily damaged, and Soviet authorities controlled key rail hubs. As a stopgap, the Americans decided to operate large truck convoys through the central corridor toward Berlin, utilizing captured German vehicles until sufficient American replacements could be shipped from the U.S. The task fell to the 3rd Army Transportation Command, headquartered in Frankfurt, and to Quartermaster Truck Battalion No. 61, later redesignated as part of the Berlin Military District Transport Detachment. The initial convoys in September 1945 used a mixture of US 2.5-ton GMC CCKW trucks and approximately 600 captured German vehicles, mainly Opel Blitz 3-ton, Henschel 33, Bussingen AG 4500, and MAN ML 4500 types. Most had been seized in depots or abandoned by the Wehrmacht in Bavaria and Thuringia. Many still bore faded Wehrmacht markings, Bockenkreuz painted over with white U.S. stars and small stenciled numbers beginning with the prefix CW, captured enemy wagon. Each truck underwent inspection by U.S. ordnance units. Technical reports show that nearly 40% of captured German trucks were mechanically sound enough for service after minimal repairs. Diesel types such as the Bussingen AG 4500S, with a 6-cylinder Deutz F6M diesel engine, proved particularly valuable due to fuel economy. U.S. logistics officers calculated that they consumed 25 to 30% less fuel than comparable gasoline-powered GMCs, an important advantage at a time when every gallon of fuel had to be imported via Antwerp and Bremerhaven. Between October and December 1945, captured German vehicles transported over 85,000 tons of cargo along the route Frankfurt, Eisenach, Gotha, Magdeburg-Berlin. Typical convoy speed was 25 to 30 kilometers per hour. Roads remained badly cratered. Bridges were makeshift, often built from timber by U.S. engineer units. Records from the 69th Truck Battalion showed daily convoy strength averaging 180 trucks, of which roughly 60 were ex-German. The Berlin detachment's daily logs, now preserved in the U.S. National Archives, Record Group 338, reveal the hybrid nature of these convoys. A single column might include an American GMC, followed by 2 Opel Blitz, a Ford the 5th 3000S, and a Henschel 33. American soldiers learned to handle German diesel engines with instruction sheets translated from Wehrmacht manuals. The Americans referred to these vehicles informally as Crowder wagons. Maintenance crews nicknamed the bussing trucks Iron Mules, rugged but underpowered. The logistical rationale was straightforward. The U.S. Army had demobilized rapidly after V-Day. By autumn 1945, only 30% of its European vehicle strength remained. Many CCKWs had been shipped back to the United States or transferred to France and Italy. Yet the Berlin garrison required daily deliveries of food, fuel, and coal, up to 5,000 tons per week for 100,000 personnel and civilian dependents within the American sector. Rail shipments through the Soviet zone were frequently delayed by administrative restrictions. Thus, motor convoys became the lifeline of the American zone in Berlin. Captured German vehicles filled the immediate gap. In U.S. documentation, they appeared under the term captured enemy equipment, vehicles, motorized, maintained by the Ordnance Technical Intelligence Section, OTIS. A report dated November 4, 1945, listed 1,842 trucks of German origin in use by American units in Germany, of which 412 operated on the Berlin corridor. The rest served within Bavaria, supplying depots at Munich, Regensburg, and Nuremberg. The road convoys were not simple routine movements. The 550-kilometer journey from Frankfurt to Berlin passed through zones of political tension and material ruin. From Kassel eastward, fuel stations and workshops barely existed. Civilian traffic clogged the roads, displaced persons, horse-drawn wagons, Soviet military vehicles. Each convoy carried its own maintenance detachment, spare parts, and portable fuel drums. Gasoline was often carried in 200-liter drums on trailers behind the lead trucks. Drivers were instructed to maintain strict spacing, 100 feet between vehicles, to reduce losses from accidents or ambush. Conditions were primitive. Reports from the 69th Truck Battalion describe frequent tire blowouts, shortage of lubricants, and engine overheating due to low-grade post-war fuel. The captured German diesels fared slightly better. Their robust construction tolerated impurities. American mechanics quickly learned the German lubrication terminology, motor roll, Getriebe, Kühlewasser, and chalked reminders on dashboards in English. For example, diesel only NOGI gas. By December 1945, as winter approached, convoy difficulties multiplied. Many captured trucks lacked heaters, windshields, or proper tires. Nonetheless, they continued to run. At Magdeburg, Soviet checkpoint officers required every vehicle to display a paper with the bilingual heading, U.S. Army, Militärfahrzeug. The cooperation was often uneasy but functional. Both sides needed supply lines to Berlin open. According to a 1946 SHEF logistical summary, the Americans delivered an average of 1,000 tons of cargo per day to Berlin during December 1945, of which 1/4 moved on captured German trucks. To keep these convoys operational, the U.S. established captured vehicle maintenance depots in Kassel and Marburg. These workshops cannibalized derelict Wehrmacht vehicles for parts. One American sergeant later recalled that entire scrapyards of German trucks were lined up, like a graveyard of steel animals. Each stripped vehicle yielded axles, transmissions, fuel pumps, or tires that kept others running. Fuel efficiency of German diesels impressed the transportation corps. The busing and AG trucks averaged 4.8 miles per gallon compared with the GMC's 3.5. However, spare parts shortages were chronic. By January 1946, only about half of the captured fleet remained operational. In parallel, American occupation authorities had begun employing German civilian drivers under Army supervision. In December 1945, over 2,000 German nationals worked as drivers and mechanics in the U.S. sector, including former Wehrmacht transport troops vetted through denazification boards. They wore civilian clothing with armbands marked U.S. Army, Civilian Driver. Pay was 15 Reichsmarks per day plus food rations. These drivers, often better acquainted with local roads, were indispensable. Some convoys were composed entirely of German drivers under U.S. command, escorted by jeeps carrying American MPs. One of the key operations occurred in February 1946, when severe frost paralyzed the railway network into Berlin. To prevent fuel shortages in the city, the U.S. 695th Truck Company organized an emergency convoy of 120 trucks. Half of them captured German diesels, from Magdeburg to Tempelhof airfield. They carried 400,000 liters of gasoline and kerosene in drums. The operation lasted 3 days. Temperatures dropped below -15 degrees Celsius. 2 American GMCs broke down from frozen carburetors, while most German diesels continued running. A post-mission report by Captain John P. Merrill noted with surprise, the Kraut diesel wagons outperformed ours in cold weather, better starting, steady pulling. These practical lessons influenced American evaluations of diesel engines for future U.S. vehicles, a point noted in Ordnance Engineering Study No. 398, 1946, which concluded that German design experience in high-torque, low RPM diesel engines for 4- and 6-ton lorries merits examination. Not all cooperation ran smoothly. Accidents were frequent. Discipline among mixed German-American convoys proved hard to enforce. Military police reports mention theft of cargo and barter with civilians along the route. Nevertheless, the convoys remained operational until late 1946, gradually replaced by rebuilt U.S. vehicles. The last documented captured German truck in active American service was struck from the rolls in December 1946, chassis number 33HG177, a busing energy used by the 61st Truck Battalion at Magdeburg. Statistical summaries compiled in spring 1947 by the Office of Military Government for Germany, U.S., estimated that captured German trucks carried more than 220,000 tons of cargo for American forces during 1945 to 46. They transported everything from rations and ammunition to medical supplies and mail sacks for occupation troops. In the immediate post-war months, these repurposed Wehrmacht vehicles were essential to sustain the Allied presence in Berlin before normal supply routes stabilized. Many of the trucks were later transferred to German civil authorities. Under Allied Control Council Directive No. 28, June 1946, usable captured motor vehicles were redistributed to local administrations to rebuild transport infrastructure. Photographic evidence from the period shows busing and Opel trucks still bearing faint Wehrmacht paint but with new license plates marked Polizei or Stadt Berlin. Thus, the same vehicles that once served the German army now carried coal and bread to Berlin's civilians under Allied supervision. The documentation from 1946 makes clear the pragmatic character of the operation. It was not ideological, it was logistical. In a devastated Europe, every functioning engine mattered, regardless of its origin. For the U.S. Army, captured German trucks represented temporary, efficient tools. They kept the supply arteries open at a time when infrastructure barely functioned and political tensions were rising. By the end of 1946, as American industry restored its logistical capacity, most captured German vehicles were retired or scrapped. Their steel was melted down, their engines salvaged for teaching purposes at ordnance schools. A few examples survived into the early 1950s, preserved for training at the U.S. Army European Theater Motor School in Mannheim, where instructors used them to illustrate enemy engineering solutions. Photographs from 1947 show rows of dusty busing trucks with American stars faintly visible beneath old German numbers. A brief but telling visual symbol of the immediate post-war transition, enemy machines serving their former adversaries in the cause of reconstruction. The use of captured German trucks by the Americans between 1945 and 1946 was thus both practical and symbolic. Practical, because it bridged the supply gap to Berlin. Symbolic, because it marked the turning of war material into instruments of recovery. Within a year, the same routes once used for invasion columns carried food and coal for a divided city. In that quiet inversion of purpose lay one of the understated stories of the Allied occupation, how the remains of a defeated army helped feed the survivors of its Ward by early 1947. The U.S. Army's reliance on captured German trucks had nearly ended, yet their impact remained visible across occupied Germany. The Transportation Corps had replaced most of the ex-Wehrmacht fleet with new or rebuilt American vehicles arriving from the United States. GMC CCKW 2.5-ton, International Harvester M5, and Studebaker US 6 models from wartime surplus stocks. Nevertheless, hundreds of German-built trucks continued to operate indirectly under American control through the emerging German civil transport organizations supervised by the occupation authorities. The transitional process began formally on March 1, 1947, when the U.S. Office of Military Government, OMGS, issued Directive 42, Transfer of Captured Motor Vehicles to German Economic Agencies. This document recognized that Germany's devastated economy required immediate transportation capacity for reconstruction and essential services. Under this directive, approximately 3,500 serviceable vehicles, including roughly 1,200 former Wehrmacht trucks, were released to regional Wirtschaftsämter, economic offices, in the American and British zones. Many bore a complex lineage. A busing truck captured by U.S. forces in 1945 might, by mid-1947, carry municipal markings of Stadtkassel or USFA, civil transport. The Americans maintained supervisory control. Civilian transport units, known as Kraftverkehrsabteilungen, were organized under U.S. Transportation Section oversight. Each was required to submit monthly mileage and maintenance reports in both English and German. Fuel was rationed strictly, allocated from Allied stockpiles in Mannheim and Bremen. The average diesel truck received 300 liters per month, just enough for limited local runs. Even in civilian use, these vehicles retained traces of their military past. Convoy numbers remained stenciled on fenders, and dashboards carried faded inspection tags marked U.S. Army Transportation Corps. The importance of these trucks persisted because rail infrastructure in central Germany remained unreliable. Many bridges across the Elbe and Saale rivers were still damaged or single-track. The American command considered road transport essential not only for occupation logistics but for economic recovery. Between April and December 1947, convoys continued to move food, coal, and reconstruction materials from the Ruhr and American Zone into Berlin. The Transportation Summary, U.S. Forces European Theater, December 1947 recorded that an average of 800 tons per day reached the American sector of Berlin by road, nearly half of it carried by vehicles operated by German civilian contractors under Allied supervision. The American sector's headquarters at Tempelhof oversaw this supply line through the Berlin Transport Office, BTO. Its fleet in mid-1947 comprised 340 American trucks and 170 German-built diesel trucks, many still of Wehrmacht origin. A handwritten notation in the BTO vehicle roster lists models such as Busing 4500S, MAN ML 4500A, Magirus S 3000, with serial numbers dating from 1942 to 44. Fuel consumption and mechanical reliability were meticulously tracked. The average operational availability of German diesels remained 78% versus 85% for newer U.S. vehicles. The contrast highlighted a fundamental reality. In 1947, despite political victory, the Western Allies still depended on remnants of the defeated Germany's industrial production to sustain the occupation itself. Throughout 1947, tensions between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union over Berlin deepened. Disputes about currency reform, reparations, and political control strained cooperation within the four-power administration. These political developments had direct logistical consequences. Soviet authorities increasingly restricted road and rail access to Berlin for Western convoys. Documentation from Transportation Corps, European Command, Surcom, notes that in October 1947, 3 convoys en route from Helmstedt to Berlin were delayed for inspection at Soviet checkpoints for more than 48 hours. The delays disrupted supply schedules and led to shortages of coal in the western sectors. American officers responded by strengthening their independent transport capacity. The captured German trucks, though aging, remained strategically useful because they could operate on locally available diesel fuel derived from German production facilities at Luna and Merseburg, rather than imported U.S. gasoline. This autonomy became significant in early 1948 as the Soviet blockade of surface routes loomed. An internal memo dated February 3, 1948, from Colonel John H. Dale, Chief of Transportation, U.S. Army Europe, stated, "Retained German diesel trucks have proven indispensable in maintaining independent haulage capability. Until new procurement of diesel equipment materializes, their continued operation is recommended despite maintenance difficulties. At that time, roughly 220 German trucks still served in U.S. occupation logistics, concentrated in depots at Kassel, Helmstedt, and Berlin. Most were worn out, with over 60,000 miles logged since capture. Tires were retreaded repeatedly, bodywork rusted through, spare parts were improvised from other scrapped vehicles. Yet they continued to run. Photographs taken by U.S. Signal Corps in March 1948 show convoys of weathered busing and Opel trucks hauling coal toward Berlin, still marked with small white stars and English unit codes, a visual echo of 1945 in the new geopolitical reality of 1948. When the Berlin blockade began on June 24, 1948, road and rail traffic into the city was cut off by Soviet order. The Western Allies responded with the Berlin airlift, Operation Vittles, shifting the primary supply route to air transport. But even then, ground convoys remained crucial for moving supplies to the airfields at Wiesbaden, Fassberg, and Celle, from which cargo planes flew to Berlin. Here again, the remaining German trucks played a part. They carried coal, flour, and aviation fuel from regional depots to loading airfields. According to the Airlift Statistical Report No. 12, September 1948, about 15% of road deliveries to airlift bases were made by German-operated trucks of pre-1945 manufacture. These trucks, once Wehrmacht vehicles, now served the logistics of relief for the same city their armies had besieged 3 years earlier. The inversion was absolute. Steel once used for invasion now sustained survival. American officers acknowledged the irony privately but focused on results. In the words of Major William T. Abbott, transportation liaison officer at Wiesbaden, we would haul supplies to feed Berlin with horse carts if needed. The fact that some of our trucks carry German plates is of no importance. The cargo matters, not the emblem. Through the second half of 1948, as airlift capacity increased, the remaining ground fleet diminished. The last American-controlled German trucks were formally written off between November 1948 and February 1949. Some were handed to the nascent Deutsche Wirtschaftskommission, the administrative body that would evolve into the East German government. Others went to municipalities in the western zones under the Marshall Plan's European Recovery Program (ERP), which sought to restore local economies. In many West German cities, old Wehrmacht trucks repainted with the logos of reconstruction firms hauled rubble, timber, and building materials through the early 1950s. American reports continued to mention them in passing. The Transportation Corps Annual History 1948-49 included a table titled Residual Captured Vehicles in Service, listing 74 units still operating as of January 1, 1949. Primarily German diesel lorries of 4.5 to 6 ton capacity, used by German civilian contractors under Army supervision. By the following year, none remained. Statistically, between mid-1945 and the end of 1948, captured German trucks under U.S. control or supervision transported an estimated 320,000 tons of cargo in total across occupied Germany and toward Berlin. This included food, coal, fuel, mail, and building materials. They also moved thousands of displaced persons and German POWs during the early repatriation phases of 1945-46. The Quartermaster General's Report, Europe, 1949 referred to them as an interim logistical instrument that bridged the gap between war and recovery. The legacy of this improvised use of enemy equipment extended beyond mere tonnage figures. American technical officers studied German vehicle designs in detail. The Deutz and MAN diesel engines impressed ordnance engineers for their efficiency and compact layout. Post-war U.S. military truck development programs, specifically the M35 2.5-ton series, introduced in 1949, incorporated lessons from these evaluations, such as multi-fuel capability and simplified field maintenance. The reports from the Captured Equipment Evaluation Program became part of standard reference material at Aberdeen Proving Ground and the Detroit Arsenal. In Berlin itself, the German trucks had left a visible mark. Contemporary photographs from 1946 to 47 show them delivering coal to apartment blocks in the American and British sectors, their cabs marked with bilingual signs, U.S. Army contract, civil transport. Residents remembered them as the first moving signs of recovery after years of rubble and starvation. A Berlin municipal report from 1949 noted that the first organized fuel deliveries of the post-war period were made using diesel trucks of former Wehrmacht design, under American control. From an operational standpoint, the experiment demonstrated the adaptability of modern logistics in post-war conditions. Using captured enemy equipment had been common practice during wartime. Extending it into peacetime reconstruction was unprecedented. The Americans treated it as a purely technical matter, vehicles as neutral machines, stripped of ideology. But in retrospect, the episode carried deeper significance. It symbolized the transformation of military technology into instruments of stabilization. Each convoy of patched-up German trucks carrying flour and fuel through the ruins of 1945 to 47 represented more than efficiency. It represented continuity of movement in a continent where almost everything else had stopped. Those convoys connected not just depots and sectors, but the wartime past with the post-war future. By the close of 1948, when the airlift dominated headlines and new American vehicles filled the highways, the era of the captured German truck quietly ended. Most of the machines that had once borne the Iron Cross were dismantled or melted into steel for the factories of the new Germany. A few survived in obscure municipal service until the mid-1950s, their wartime origins forgotten under layers of paint. One preserved Bussingen G4500, reportedly used by U.S. forces at Helmstedt in 1946, later entered the Deutsches Technikmuseum collection in Berlin, where it stands today. Its side panels still showing faint traces of American stencil numbers beneath later restorations. From a logistical viewpoint, the episode lasted barely 3 years. From a historical one, it bridged two worlds, the military destruction of 1945 and the political reconstruction that followed. In that interlude, American soldiers drove German trucks along German roads to feed German civilians in a divided capital. It was a simple act of necessity that became an emblem of transformation. When the U.S. Army formally closed the captured vehicle division in spring 1949, its final report concluded with a single understated line. All captured enemy vehicles, having served their purpose, are hereby declared obsolete. The line marked administrative closure, but not historical. The practical use of German trucks in 1945 to 48 remains one of the overlooked logistical stories of the Allied occupation, proof that in the aftermath of war, recovery often begins not with new machines, but with whatever still runs.